A fully armed pirate sloop in 1710 carried fewer than 30 men and maybe 8 guns, yet it could terrorize merchant vessels 10 times its size. That paradox is the whole story. We think of pirate ships as floating fortresses, bristling with cannon, crewed by hundreds of cutthroat killers. The reality is almost the opposite. A pirate ship was a precision machine, built for speed, intimidation, and the fastest possible boarding, not for prolonged battle. Every plank, every rope, every gun placement was a calculated decision. Today we go deck by deck, compartment by compartment, and by the end you'll understand exactly why the most dangerous thing on a pirate ship was almost never the cannon. One part of the ship that almost every documentary ignores was actually the single biggest tactical advantage pirates had over the Royal Navy, and it had nothing to do with weapons. And there's a number hiding in the crew manifest of Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge that rewrites everything you think you know about how pirate crews actually fought. Picture a weapon that destroys its own ammunition the moment it fires. That is exactly what a pirate ship becomes the second it sinks a prize. Every plank that goes under, every merchant sailor who drowns, that is money, gone. Recruits, gone. Rope, canvas, provisions, coin in the hold, all of it gone. So the whole machine, the hull, the guns, the rigging, the crew packed below, is engineered around one brutal economic constraint. Take the other ship intact. Take her crew alive. And do it fast enough that nobody has time to scuttle her or throw the cargo over the side. Speed over armor, because you need to catch the prize before she runs. Intimidation over firepower, because a merchant captain who surrenders saves you the fight entirely. Boarding over bombardment, because a broadside that holds the hull is money you just spent on yourself. Every choice you are about to see, deck by deck, is downstream of that one calculation. Not glory, not adventure, margin. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We go this deep on every video. That constraint, preserve the prize at all costs, flows directly into the first decision any pirate crew made. Which hull to sail? Not the Galleon. Never the Galleon. That towering three-masted silhouette is a fantasy borrowed from the Spanish treasure fleet, and most working pirates wanted nothing to do with it. What they actually sailed was the sloop, or its close cousin, the brigantine, a lean, low, single or double-masted hull that rode high on the water and could claw into the wind at angles a square-rigged warship simply could not match. Here is the number that tells the whole story. A Royal Navy 6th rate, already one of the smaller fighting vessels in the fleet, needed roughly 15 feet of water under her keel. A Bahamian sloop needed 5. That 10-foot gap meant a sloop could vanish into coastal inlets, mangroves, and river mouths, where a naval pursuer had to stop dead and watch. The Bahamas, the Carolina Sounds, the shallow lagoons of Hispaniola, all of them were essentially pirate-only territory. Fore and aft rigging gave the sloop one more edge. It could sail closer to the wind than any square rigger, which meant it chose when a chase began and when it ended. The Navy built ships to fight. Pirates built ships to leave. Below the waterline, below every deck you'll ever see in a painting, sits the part of the ship that actually kept everyone alive. Ballast. Typically 20 to 40 tons of it. River gravel, loose stone, or cast iron pigs laid directly in the bilge. The weight sat low on purpose, pulling the center of gravity down, so the hull rocked rather than rolled over in a squall. Too little, and a stiff wind put the mast in the water. Too much, and she rode deep, dragging her hull through the sea like a loaded cart through mud. And for a crew whose entire strategy depended on speed, That was nearly as fatal as capsizing. Every time pirates took a prize and offloaded cargo, the trim shifted. Crews adjusted ballast by hand, stone by stone, to keep the hull balanced and the bow lifting clean. And then there was the bilge pump, a wooden barrel and leather contraption that needed working every watch on any vessel more than a few years old. A clogged pump on a hull taking even modest water gave the crew days, not weeks. Pump duty went to the men being punished. The worst job on the ship, the one you could not skip, directly below your feet, below the gun deck, below the crew's hammocks. The hold ran the full length of the keel, dark and low-ceilinged, smelling of salt brine, wet wood, and whatever was rotting slowest. For a crew of 60 on a 6-week cruise, provisioning was a brutally precise calculation. Roughly 3,000 pounds of salt beef and hardtack biscuit, around 500 gallons of fresh water, supplemented by whatever rain the crew could catch in stretched canvas. And then, in a volume that would surprise you, alcohol. Rum or small beer, not for morale alone, but because fresh water turned green and foul within 2 weeks at sea. The cask of beer was the safer drink. But here is what pirates actually hunted in a captured hold. Not coin, not jewelry. Food, sailcloth, rope, and medicine. A bolt of canvas could re-rig a damaged ship. A barrel of salt pork could extend a cruise by weeks. And a surgeon's chest, with its lancets, tourniquets, and whatever passed for antiseptic in the early 18th century, was arguably the single most valuable object a prize vessel could carry. Scurvy and infected wounds killed more men in a pirate crew than any naval broadside ever did. The hold was the ship's stomach and its bank vault at once. Empty it wrong, and the whole operation stopped. Cannon, cutlass, or grappling hook, which do you think actually won the most pirate battles? Drop your guess below. Everything below your feet, the ballast stones, the bilge pump, the casks of salt pork, was not storage. It was a living system, and it needed daily work to stay alive. Let a single piece of it slip, and the whole ship started dying. Hull fouling, provisions rotting, men losing teeth to scurvy within weeks. Now we move up, because the same ruthless logic, keep the ship fast, keep the prize whole, shaped every single weapon on the fighting decks. The same logic that shaped the hold shaped every gun bolted to the deck above it. Protect the prize, don't sink it. A typical pirate sloop carried somewhere between 4 and 12 cannon. Even a larger converted snow or brigantine, the workhorses of the Golden Age, rarely mounted more than 20. That number would embarrass a naval frigate, and it was deliberate. More guns meant more weight, more crew to serve them, and more risk of punching a hole through the very cargo you were chasing. Placement mattered more than count. The guns were positioned to deliver a single raking broadside across a target's bow or stern, firing down the length of the hull, shredding rigging and scattering crew on deck, not to trade broadsides in an artillery duel that neither side could afford. The most used guns on any pirate vessel were the chase guns, 2 cannon mounted at the bow, angled slightly outward. During a pursuit, a 4-pound iron ball, fired at roughly 200 yards, could cut through a fleeing ship's lines and bring down a yard without ever touching the hull planking below. The goal was always the same: stop the ship, keep it floating, keep the cargo dry. Dismasting a prize was an inconvenience. Holing it at the waterline was destroying your own paycheck. Where the main cannon threatened the hull, the swivel guns threatened the people on it, and that distinction is everything. Picture a short, stubby iron barrel, roughly 2 feet long, socketed into an iron fork bolted to the rail. Swivel guns ran around the upper deck every 6 to 8 feet, and a well-fitted sloop might carry a dozen or more of them alongside 8 main cannon. Each one weighed somewhere between 30 and 60 pounds, light enough for a single man to traverse by hand, aim, and fire without a gun crew. The load was the point. Forget round shot. A swivel gun was charged with Grapeshot, a canvas bag of iron balls that spread on exit, or Langridge, which was essentially whatever the gunner had to hand: scrap iron, cut nails, broken glass, chain links. At 30 yards, one discharge swept a section of open deck the way a scythe sweeps grass. In a boarding action, the sequence was deliberate. Swivels fired first, suppressing the enemy crew, men diving for cover, wounded, disoriented. Then the boarders came over the rail. They were not meeting a formed defense. They were meeting survivors of it. Langridge comes from a Dutch term for mixed rubbish. The name was honest. 1 crewman, 1 swivel, 30 yards. That was the weapon that actually cleared the deck. So here is the part that reframes everything you just heard about cannon placement and swivel fire. Most of it was theater. The standard pirate engagement did not open with a broadside. It opened with a flag, the black or the red, which had its own specific meaning. No quarter was not a figure of speech. It was a contractual announcement. Surrender now, or we give you nothing, not even your life. Then 1 shot across the bow. 1. And then silence, while the merchant captain made his calculation. That calculation was usually quick. He was underpaid, his crew was smaller, his guns were lighter, and the cargo in his hold belonged to a London merchant or an insurance syndicate, not to him. Records from the Bahamas Vice Admiralty Court, covering roughly the peak decade of Golden Age piracy, show the overwhelming majority of prizes were taken without meaningful resistance. Not most, the overwhelming majority. The cannon's actual job was to make surrender feel like the rational choice. And it worked, not because the guns were powerful, but because the reputation behind them was. Charles Johnson's General History of the Pirates is full of captains who struck their colors before a single ball landed. The most dangerous weapon on that ship was not iron. It was the story the crew had let travel ahead of them through every port they'd passed. The gun deck is still ahead, and what we find there breaks every assumption. Subscribe so you catch it. Would you rather serve on a pirate ship or a Royal Navy frigate? 1 minute to decide. Answer in the comments. The theater of reputation only held, of course, if the ship itself stayed intact. And nothing threatened that faster than the room directly below your feet. Tucked deep in the hull, below the waterline, the powder magazine was lined with copper sheeting and hung with wet felt curtains at the entrance. Copper because it cannot spark. Felt because it trapped any stray ember before it traveled inward. No open flame came within roughly 20 feet of that door. Lanterns, when needed, sat behind thick glass in a separate antechamber. Light passed through. Flame did not. The men who carried cartridges up to the guns were called powder monkeys. Boys mostly, 10 to 14 years old, chosen because they were small enough to move fast through low-clearance passages between decks. Quick, light, and disposable in the brutal accounting of a working ship. The ritual around that room was close to religious, because the consequence of carelessness was total. In 1703, an accidental magazine explosion aboard HMS Vanguard killed over 300 men in a single event. Not a battle, not an enemy broadside. One spark in the wrong place. Pirates knew that story. Every sailor did. The magazine was not just the most dangerous room on the ship. It was the room that could make every other room irrelevant. What kept the magazine intact and the whole ship functional was the thing above it, above everything, the rigging. Picture two separate systems working at once. The standing rigging, the shrouds and stays, thick tarred hemp, fixed in place, held the masts upright against forces that could snap oak like green wood. The running rigging, sheets, halyards, braces, moved constantly, controlling the angle and shape of every sail. Together, they were the ship's engine and its steering wheel in one tangled web. A disciplined crew could shift a full sail configuration in under 4 minutes. That gap, 4 minutes between a square-rigged posture and a fore and aft trim that could cut closer to the wind, was often the difference between catching a prize and watching it ghost away. Pirates recruited skilled riggers and sailmakers from captured merchant crews with deliberate intent, frequently offering them a share of prizes to sign the articles. A good sailmaker was worth more to the operation than a second gunner, which is exactly why the preferred opening move against a resisting ship was chain shot. 2 iron balls joined by a short length of chain, tumbling end over end through the air. It didn't kill men efficiently. It shredded rope and canvas. A dismasted ship goes nowhere, surrenders quickly, and arrives at the prize port with its hull and cargo untouched. The rigging was the engine. Chain shot was the off switch. But here's what no one tells you about every system we've just walked through. The swivels, the chain shot, the fast hull, the minimal cannon load. None of it was built for a long fight. It was built for a 10-minute fight. At Ocracoke Inlet in 1718, the engagement that killed Blackbeard lasted roughly 10 minutes of actual combat. 10 minutes. Because every minute past that was a minute a naval patrol could close the horizon. The clock was always running. Below the gun deck, the crew lived in a space that smelled of salt, sweat, and tallow. Hammocks slung roughly 18 inches apart from beam to beam. The Royal Navy's official standard was 14 inches, which means a pirate crew actually slept with more room than a pressed sailor in His Majesty's service. Small comfort, but a real one. The real difference, though, was on paper. Before any voyage cleared harbor, the crew signed articles. A written contract specifying exactly who got what and what happened if you broke the rules. On some ships, losing your right arm in action paid 600 pieces of 8 in compensation. A left arm fetched 500. A lost eye around 100. These weren't gestures of generosity. They were actuarial calculations designed to keep men willing to board a defended vessel. Prize shares were controlled not by the captain, but by the quartermaster, the figure who actually distributed plunder, resolved disputes, and represented the crew's collective interest against the captain's authority. The captain commanded in combat. The quartermaster ran everything else. Voting rights on major decisions, whether to take a particular prize, where to careen, whether to accept a pardon, were written into the same document. This wasn't idealism. It solved a very specific problem. How do you keep a crew loyal when you cannot pay them a fixed wage and cannot imprison them for deserting? You give them ownership of the outcome instead. The articles were the ship's real structural support, more load-bearing than any deck beam. Which deck surprised you most, the hold, the gun deck, or the captain's cabin? Tell us below. The quartermaster controlled the plunder. The articles governed the crew, but there was one room on the ship that answered to neither. The captain's cabin sat at the stern, built directly into the ship's widest point, where the hull curved outward and the windows let in actual light. It was small by any land standard, perhaps 10 feet across on a mid-sized sloop, but it was the only space on the vessel with a door that locked. Inside, charts, a magnetic compass, a quadrant or backstaff for reading the sun's altitude at noon, and the captain's personal arsenal, pistols, a sword, whatever he trusted most. The navigation instruments alone were worth more than most crewmen would see in a year of prizes. The lock mattered symbolically as much as practically, because outside that door, the captain's authority had hard limits. He commanded absolutely when powder was burning. No vote, no debate, his word was the ship. But between engagements, the crew could remove him. Thomas Anstis's crew did exactly that in the early 1720s, voting their captain out for conduct the men found wanting. It happened on other ships, too. The articles made it legal. So the locked cabin door was the captain's one physical assertion of rank in a vessel that ran structurally on consent. Command by day, a bolt and a backstaff by night. The locked cabin door told you everything about where authority lived between fights. The boarding sequence told you where it lived during one. Once the Swivels had done their last work, a final discharge of Grapeshot raking the prize's deck at close range, the grappling hooks went over. Iron, 4 to 6 hooks per throw, on heavy rope, catching the prize's rail or rigging. Both crews hauled. The gap between hulls closed in roughly 20 to 30 seconds. That window was everything. The prize crew either cut the lines or they didn't. If they didn't, the ships came together with a grinding thud of oak on oak, and the boarders went over the rail. What they carried was specific. Pistols, one shot, then reversed and used as a club, because reloading on a wet, lurching deck was not a realistic option. Short cutlasses, blade averaging around 28 to 32 inches, because anything longer fouled in the rigging and between the masts. And boarding axes, roughly 18 inches of handle, a spike on the back, a broad chopping edge forward. The axe could split open a locked hatch, or clear a line, or open a skull. All 3 tasks inside 30 seconds, in that order, if necessary. Cutlass traces back through the French Cutlass to the Italian coltello, simply a knife. That's what it was, not a dueling weapon. A knife, scaled up for the work at hand. The boarding axes were still wet when the real work began. Not fighting, but maintenance. A wooden hull does not stay fast. Within 6 to 8 weeks at sea, barnacles and weed colonize the planking below the waterline, a slow, silent accumulation that can bleed off a fifth to nearly a third of your top speed. For a merchant captain on a scheduled run, that was an inconvenience. For a pirate crew whose entire survival depended on being faster than whatever was chasing them, it was a death sentence, written in slow motion. So they careened, regularly, deliberately, every 6 to 8 weeks where possible. They found a hidden inlet, the Bahamas, the Carolina coast, the sheltered bays of Madagascar, ran the ship onto a shallow beach at high tide, and tipped her onto her side using tackles rigged to the mast. The hull came up out of the water, barnacles and all, and the crew went at it with scrapers and burning torches, then recaulked the seams and slapped on fresh pine tar. The smell of hot tar and scorched weed carried a long way on a still morning. A Royal Navy frigate on extended patrol might go 4 to 6 months between careening. Every week she got a little slower, and her captain didn't feel it until he tried to run something down and couldn't. That clean hull is why the sloop got away. Not better sailors, not more guns. Tar and a beach, and the discipline to stop every 6 weeks and do the ugly work. The Navy called those hidden beaches a nuisance. Pirates called them the edge. Here is the number that recontextualizes everything. Queen Anne's Revenge carried roughly 40 guns. Blackbeard's crew numbered around 300 men. That is nearly 8 men per gun, more than twice the naval standard of 3 or 4. The arithmetic is the answer. You did not need 250 men to work a broadside. You needed them crouched below the rail, invisible, waiting for the moment the target's captain decided resistance was futile. The guns fired once for theater, then the men came over. The ship was never a warship. It was a boarding vehicle wearing a warship's costume. And beneath the waterline, the real edge, a hull scraped clean every 6 to 8 weeks, running near its full speed while the Navy frigate sent to chase it dragged months of weed and barnacles and bled away a fifth to nearly a third of its pace, without its captain feeling it until it was too late. Every choice on that ship, the shallow draft, the swivel guns, the written articles, the careening schedule, the single warning shot, pointed at one outcome: take the prize intact, sell it quickly, and be gone before the paperwork caught up. The most dangerous thing aboard was not the powder magazine, it was the business model. The cannon was the least important thing on the gun deck. The manifest knew it all along. So the most dangerous thing on a pirate ship wasn't the cannon, wasn't Blackbeard, wasn't even the 300 men below decks. It was a clean hull and a signed contract. If that reframing landed, drop a comment. Cannon, Cutlass, or the careening beach? Which one actually ran the golden age of piracy? Next video.